Hi everyone, my name is Nicole. I'm a postdoc at the University of Mannheim, and today I'm presenting the last piece for my PhD, where I looked at the role of offline meetups on Wikipedia. Research, I focus on the German language version of Wikipedia, which is one of the largest and most active language versions. At the moment, the German language version is overseen by around roughly 170 administrators. And the German Wikipedia also features quite a notable offline component in the form of self-organized local meetups, so something like informal get-togethers or also more formal editathons. In my research, I looked at how those offline meetups influence different kinds of online behavior, and today specifically I focus on the role of offline meetups in becoming administrator. Now, admins on Wikipedia are in a position of power and authority. They do have special rights and privileges, but they also have to do some extra unpaid labor. And what we do know from a recent research report is that the number of administrators has been declining in many Wikipedias, including also the German language version, mostly because fewer new admins are joining. Now, to become administrator, users have to undergo this rather burdensome process of a request for adminship, where they have to be nominated and are then being publicly evaluated. In the German language Wikipedia, there is a number of official eligibility criteria, which are rather modest, that users need to have been active for at least a certain amount of time to be even eligible to run as administrator. But more unofficially, the criteria are more strict. Users do look for strong commitment to the project. And what I'm asking today is whether offline meetup participation might be also a relevant criterion. So to answer this question, I use publicly available data from 2001 up to 2020. First, I use election data, so scraping those requests for adminship. I combine this with meeting data, which registers which user have attended what meetups, and lastly, I combine this with user activity data. I then have two main questions. First, I look at who runs for administrator. Second, I ask who is ultimately successful, so wins those elections. The setup for my first question is a bit complex. My unit of observations are user years. So what I did is I looked at every first of a month and I checked which users are eligible at this first of a month. This monthly data I then collapsed into yearly data. So what I have is for each user, I know when they have been active and I know whether they would have been eligible for at least 1 month within this year or not. I have around 100,000 of those user year observations, which belong to 30,000 different users. And in 800 cases, there is a user year in which the user then actually ran for administrator. To analyze the data, I use multi-level within between LPMs, which allow me to disentangle both within user effects and between user effects. Now the setup for my second question is much more straightforward. Here I just concentrate on all elections, or more specifically all elections with an eligible candidate, because there were around 20 where the candidate was not actually eligible. I end up with 1,200 elections, 60% of those being successful. And to analyze those, I use standard LPMs, accounting for the clustering on user level. Now what I'm interested in is the role of offline meeting measures, and I look at the meetups within the last 12 years to calculate those. So if I have an election, I look 1 year back and I consider all the meetups having taken place in the last 12 months. And because I'm really interested in isolating those effects, I control for a number of online effects. So I control the online network that the user is in terms of collaboration, so co-editing and communication, as well as reverting behavior, their general activity, tenure, and year. So what do I find? What I'm showing here are coefficient plots for a full model in which all variables, so all of those offline measures, as well as all control variables are included. Now for my first question is who runs for administrator? And what I find is not that much. I found that users that attend on average more meetups are less likely to run as administrator. This is the very first variable. But everything else is not significant and doesn't matter. And generally, all coefficients are very small, especially compared to online measures. For example, the effects of having talked to more users on talk pages is 20 times larger than having met more users. So I find very limited evidence of the role of offline meetups in stepping forward as administrator. If I look at becoming administrator, so who's being successful, I find that there's a positive and significant effect of having met a higher proportion of voters. So just having met 1 percentage point more of voters leads to a 2.7 percentage point increase in the probability of winning the election. So overall, offline meetups play a very limited role in this process of becoming administrator, and they matter less than at least I anticipated. But there is a lot that future research can still do, something that the reviewer suggested and I'm doing in the very near future for the full paper version is to look at time-dependent effects of offline meetups, which would mean that maybe meetups played a bigger role in the early days of Wikipedia, but less so once it was more institutionalized. A different direction could also look into the mechanism behind associations or zoom more strongly into the data and look at maybe effects of specific groups or people or meetup places. I do want to say that all of the data is public, so please feel free and very encouraged to conduct future research yourselves. Thanks a lot for your time, and I look forward to any questions and suggestions.